The 80s and 90s were tough for gamers. Not many people had access to a reliable source to know how good or bad a game is. The only ways to know if a game is good or not is by judging the box art or through researching very early gaming magazines. Good luck finding one that isn't too biased. As time moved forward, our range of sources became widespread. Previews, reviews, and trailers are more commonplace, and the internet helped shape judgments on what gamers want to spend their hard-earned money on. Consequently, mediocrity became less tolerable, and anything below a 7, even an 8 out of 10, are considered irrelevant instantly. It's not too hard to understand why this is the case. Gaming is an expensive hobby, and if someone wants to fork over $60, $100, even $200 for a game, the expectation is a fun, functioning, and content-rich experience. What I want to talk about are a group of other games that fall under this category, ones that showed promise in the beginning, but underdelivered by release. There are some things I want to clarify before we get started. I am only comparing a game with its predecessor and whatever form of support is received, like patches and DLC. Development history and marketing play a huge role. Depending on how these elements are handled, it can be beneficial or detrimental to a game's success, with Battlefield 5 and Anthem being recent examples. Just because the game is considered mediocre doesn't mean there's no fun to be had. The games on this list are games that, while flawed, had moments where I was having fun, for reasons I will explain later in the video. With that out of the way, let's get started. Star Wars is a franchise that is beloved by so many, it doesn't need an introduction. But I'm gonna give it one anyway. What was once a trilogy of films is now a franchise of galaxy-sized proportions. I don't believe I have ever met a person who didn't know what Star Wars was because the name is everywhere. Novels, TV shows, comic books, toys, spin-off movies, and a plethora of video games are what kept the franchise fresh in fans' memories for over 40 years. That brings me to EA's Star Wars Battlefront, a reboot of LucasArts and Pandemic's original Battlefront series. 10 years after the release of LucasArts' Star Wars Battlefront 2, EA and Battlefield developer DICE released what was meant to be a new Battlefront game for a new generation. I'd like to say, first and foremost, that EA's Battlefront 1 is gorgeous to look at. From the character models, the starships, and the environment, this game looks and feels like a Star Wars game. If I had to rate this game based on its graphics alone, it would be an easy 10 out of 10 for me. While the gameplay is nothing too different from other shooters, the foundation for a new game is there, but it feels like the developers played it too safe for the reboot. The original Battlefront series was known for large-scale battles across the Star Wars films released at the time, playing as different classes like standard infantry, snipers, engineers, and pilots. Battlefront 2 introduced playable heroes from the movies such as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Han Solo. In EA's Battlefront, the scope is limited to the original trilogy. There are a few exceptions, but we'll get there soon enough. In previous games, all players are limited to certain weapons and equipment for a specific class. Infantry carried assault weapons, engineers carried repair tools, and snipers carried, well, sniper rifles. Duh. In the reboot, all players can create their own custom loadout. Everyone can use all equipment and weapons with no restrictions. Usually this would mean a good thing, but I would make the argument that it's not. Having pre-made loadouts gives the players a role to fulfill. Engineers can not only repair starships, but also supply and health stations. A group of infantry can rush an enemy objective, and snipers can protect said infantry by providing covering fire. All these gameplay elements give a sense of strategy that EA's Battlefront lacks. I should mention that you don't enter vehicles like in the previous games. Instead, players pick up tokens scattered across the map in order to ride on these vehicles. This includes equipment like auto turrets and even playing as heroes. That means, if you want to get the chance of playing as Boba Fett, you'll need to get the hero token faster than anyone else, throwing away team play altogether. Which is shocking, given that DICE is the developer behind the Battlefield series, which in itself is a team-based first-person shooter. What's more shocking is the amount of content present. Only 4 planets were available at launch: Tatooine, Hoth, Ondor, and Sullust, with 4 more released within a year via paid DLC. The Outer Rim, which still takes place on the planet Tatooine, Bespin, the Death Star, and Scarif, the Rogue One tie-in DLC, and several free updates like the Force Awakens tie-in Jakku. Compare this to Battlefront 2, a 2005 game, where the game launched with the following planets: Geonosis, Hoth, Death Star, Dagobah, Mustafar, Utapau, Tantive 4, Coruscant, Polis Massa, Naboo, Kashyyyk, Bespin, Yavin 4, Tatooine, Ondor, Kamino, Volusia, Megiddo, and the Xbox exclusive Renvar. Well, I mean, that is unless you mod it via PC. With the exception of Renvar, all these planets are available from the start at no extra cost. EA's Battlefront is at its core an online-only multiplayer game. There are very few single-player modes such as the tutorial, survival, and missions. There is an option to play certain online modes offline, like Walker Assault and Fighter Squadron against the AI or with a second player. This option was implemented in an update later in the game's lifespan. Even then, it screws over the consumer by not allowing the DLC planets being playable in those modes, with the exception of Jakku. It's things like this that are the reasons why I'm talking about the first game rather than the second game. Sure, EA's Battlefront 2 was terrible when it came to monetization and progression, but it's an improvement compared to the first game, incorporating 3 Star Wars eras and offering free content in the game's lifespan. As of writing the script, a game named Drive Club will shut down their online servers next year. This means its online multiplayer component, the reason why the game exists in the first place, will cease to work. Thankfully, there is enough single-player content to justify purchasing a physical copy, or any copy for that matter. EA's Battlefront doesn't have enough content to support this reason. Hypothetically, if the game's servers were to shut down soon, there would be little reason to keep playing. After receiving the Season Pass content, Battlefront 1 became a more content-filled game. But I can't help but wonder what it would look like if it had as many maps and modes as its predecessor from the start. Mafia is a series that I haven't heard about other than as a Grand Theft Auto clone until I played Mafia 2 a few years after its release. This is the video game equivalent of a Martin Scorsese film. The quality of the writing, acting, and story of the game could rival against a film like Goodfellas. When Mafia 3 came out in 2016, and hearing that the game would take place in the late 1960s, I was expecting the same amount of effort being put from Mafia 2 to Mafia 3. While I got that, there are other elements that were lost in the process. Storytelling is its strongest suit, replicating what is found in a documentary, where the game interviews key characters in the story, like Father James, and uses archival footage of a court case and the Vietnam War. The main character, Lincoln Clay, is as interesting as Styrofoam. He doesn't have a standout personality compared to the other cast of characters. The only things we know about the main character is that he was a Vietnam War veteran looking for revenge after the Italian mob killed his family, the Black Mob. Along the way, he meets and recruits people with similar interests such as Cassandra, leader of the Haitian mob, Thomas Burton, Irish mob leader, and Vito Scaletta, who was exiled from Empire Bay and the protagonist of Mafia 2. Lincoln's only role in the story is to further the plot and nothing else. With that said, the acting is well done and harkens back to blaxploitation films.
Look who I found panhandling out in front of the train station.
Pleasure, man.
Welcome back, baby.
Boy, I send you to bring Lincoln Clay home. Not the big nigger who ate him.
Well, shit, old man. I finally went somewhere they knew how to cook.
Welcome home, son.
As for gameplay, this is the most repetitive and tedious open-world game I have ever played. Missions outside of the main campaign boil down to destroying enemy assets and killing and recruiting the Italian mob bosses from various districts in New Bordeaux. Though, that's not to say Mafia 2's open world is perfect. The game is advertised as an open world game, but to say that it's an open world is not entirely true. The world of Mafia 2 has nothing much to do when it came to side activities. Sure, there's car drop-offs and races, but nothing that grabs the player's attention for too long. The main draw of Mafia 2 is the story and grounded nature of the 1940s and 1950s, so more than likely or not, players would just go from point A to point B to see the story to the end. In Mafia 3, they resolved this issue by adding more side content, but managed to make the repetitive missions a part of the core gameplay. The AI is not the smartest when it comes to stealth. For example, I'm hiding behind a boat out in the open, and this enemy not only passes by me like he's seeing the world through a periscope, he also does this.
Reloading! Cover me! Shit! I'm taking cover! We must have scared that pigeon.
The way this game is structured makes stealth missions so easy my mother could do it in her sleep. Consistency is not the game's strongest suit. This extends to the visuals of the game. Mafia 3 is beautiful whenever it feels like it. Character models are detailed, but under certain lighting can look odd. At night, the city can both be beautiful and unsettling, but by day, it ranges between okay to downright ugly. Shadows can sometimes be inconsistent, mirrors don't work as intended, and most notably, day can turn into night and vice versa at an instant. In Mafia 3, there is a game mechanic where, if you wipe out an Italian mob-controlled area, Lincoln can give it to one of his lieutenants. If you neglect to give one lieutenant an area, that person would wage war against Lincoln. This introduces a different spin to organized crime management, but as long as you distribute the areas evenly to your lieutenant, no one will die. Thankfully, there are multiple endings that depend on Lincoln's actions in the game. For the sake of spoilers, I won't say what the endings are, but trust me, it's not as good compared to Mafia 2. Mafia 3 isn't a terrible game by any means. I believe the problems stem from living up to the expectations of Mafia 2. The production values, writing, acting, and story of the second game rival against the Grand Theft Auto series, and some Academy Award-winning films. Mafia 3 had great story elements as well, but also had repetitive missions, generic gameplay, and an inconsistent visual flow. Bungie Activision's Destiny was meant to be a game that kickstarted a series in the scale of The Lord of the Rings and Bungie's own Halo series. When the original game launched in 2014, however, there are elements and features that are lacking in order to reach that goal. A complex story, worthwhile content, and overall world building, to name a few. Even with these disadvantages, Destiny is still a decent game that I put a bit of time into. The issues were rectified through post-launch support, from small bug patches to full-blown expansions up until 2016. When it came time for the sequel in 2017, fans were expecting to see these issues resolved. For some reason, not only did old issues return, there were new problems that came with it. One thing I must stress before I go further: I received Destiny 2 for free during the game's 1-year anniversary on the Battle.net platform, and I played Destiny 1 when the Taken King expansion released. With that said, my experiences and gripes with the game may differ from your own. I will do my best to be as fair as I can, keeping in mind that this sold for a full $60 retail price. Destiny is classified as a first-person looter shooter, where the gameplay objective is to search for the best guns and armor for your player character. Part of the problem with Destiny 1 is that there is no real sense of world building. All the world building exists in the form of grimoire cards on the Destiny website. The sequel attempts to fix this problem by creating a story that involves a central villain instead of a dark force that was from the first game. While the attempt for a more coherent story was appreciated, story elements from Destiny 2 would make central plot points from the first game retconned? Based on a very quick Google search I made, it seems that descriptions such as the darkness were too vague to be even considered retconned. For example, the enemy races like the Vex, the Fallen, and the Cabal are no longer a part of this darkness, as vaguely described in the first game. This begs a few questions, however. did Bungie prepare a solid idea on what the overall story would look like in their 10-year plan with Activision? Why would they keep a majority of these story elements vague if that was the case? Did Activision's influence made Bungie cut certain story elements during the development of Destiny 1? The point I'm trying to make is that for all the problems Bungie fixed with Destiny 2, they brought in a mix of old and new problems. All of this is without mentioning the post-launch content that was provided, which was a repeat of the last game. In the first game, Destiny 1 offered players an expansion pass that contained 2 content packs, which released later in the year. Each one contains a new storyline, new strike missions, new weapons, armor, and other cosmetic items. Then, 1 year after launch, the game came out with a real expansion called The Taken King, which introduced new subclasses and a new enemy type. 1 year later after that came another expansion called Rise of Iron. The problem with this pricing model is that it discourages players buying previous editions with every expansion release, and splits the player base with every release. This is repeated again with the sequel, offering 2 more expansions, The Curse of Osiris and Warmind, and a major update, Forsaken, the year after release. And on top of all of these expansions, there is also the controversial Eververse Marketplace. Remember what I said about the gameplay loop of the series? That players earn and collect the best armor and weapons in the game? What if I told you you can skip the grind by buying the gear outright? That's right, with a small fee, you can purchase bright engrams for the chance of getting an item out of a pool of weapons, armor, emotes, shaders, and other items. And yes, a chance, as in, you're not even guaranteed the item you want. Keep in mind, this is a $500 million 10-year series. Activision doesn't want just your money, they want all the money in the world. Whether it's Activision's fault for rushing the development and horribly monetizing the series, or Bungie's fault for not communicating properly to the fans, Destiny 2 managed to be a regression of the first game. Thankfully, that behavior may have taken its toll, as both Bungie and Activision broke up from their 10-year partnership, one that technically lasted only 8 years, months after the Forsaken expansion. Bungie still retains publishing rights to the Destiny series, so only time will tell if the problem with the Destiny series lies within Activision or Bungie whenever Destiny 3 comes out. Marvel vs. Capcom is a fighting game series that I have grown to love since playing X-Men vs. Street Fighter on the arcades when I was a kid. It wasn't until I played the Marvel 3 series that my passion for fighting games ignited. When tournament support ended for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, fans kept asking the same question. When's Marvel? Our questions were answered in late 2016 when Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was first revealed to the public. Once released in September 2017, however, not everyone was ecstatic. First impressions are always important for any form of medium, and my impression for MVCI was not a good one. The graphics look like they belonged from the PS3, Xbox 360 era. The character models range from okay to just awful. I mean, look at what they've done to my Morrigan, my queen! She looks like a crack whore now. And Frank looks like he's seen better days. Ooh, X and Zero look kinda cool. What the hell is wrong with your face? This is compared to the character models from the last game, 6 years before MVCI. Take a look. Iron Man and Thor look like a combination of their film and comic book counterparts. Amaterasu's style from Okami is preserved in this game, and Morgan, under this art style, is the source of my teenage fetishes. In MVCI, however, the style and comic book aesthetics of what made the previous game unique is washed away and replaced with a more semi-realistic style that doesn't suit most characters. It was at this point that I just wanted to capture footage of one arcade playthrough and be done with it. As I progressed, however, I found myself in training mode, mission mode, and completing a few more arcade runs by the end of the session. I was having so much fun discovering what options I had as I continued playing. I'm not going to overwhelm you with the details as most of it is fighting game lingo, but the best way I can describe the feel is that any combo you can think of, you might be able to perform it. Even as I continue writing this script, I'm still discovering new ways to perform combos and experimenting with characters I didn't expect to play as. Speaking of which, do you notice anyone missing from this character roster from this Marvel vs. Capcom game? I'll give you a hint. It starts with X, and it ends with men. Characters like Wolverine, Magneto, and Storm were staple characters, not just for the fighting game series, but for the Marvel brand. These characters, alongside Doctor Doom, were omitted from the new installment. Based on interviews, it was said that the reason for their exclusion was due to keeping focus on a smaller cast with diverse movesets. Having played the game, I can see this reason being plausible. Ultimate Marvel's gameplay loop revolves around a large roster of characters where only a few are viable, and others serve a specific role. In MBCI, the opposite is true. The game has a smaller roster, but it's possible to win with characters like Hagar and Hulk. At the same time, I don't think it's the only reason why the X-Men and the Fantastic Four cats were excluded from MBCI, and unfortunately, I don't believe it's a creative decision. In 2017, the film rights to the Fantastic Four and the X-Men were under 20th Century Fox. Marvel and Disney wanted to promote Infinity War, so they wanted to promote characters like Gamora, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel. From a business perspective, it would be ridiculous to promote characters from franchises that Disney doesn't own. At least, not yet. If anything, MBCI feels like a soulless cash grab whose sole purpose is to advertise a product. This soullessness can be felt in-game with character interactions from the beginning and end of a match.
What would you like me to burn next?
Target destroyed. Returning to base.
Who's next?
Now, compare these interactions to the ones found in UMBC 3.
You win! Forgive me, darling.
You offer to defend me? Most offensive.
Just the arm? What? Can't afford the rest of the suit?
How much of that suit is by?
This goes for arcade runs as well. Normally, when players complete an arcade run, they are treated to a small story about a character they played as. In MBCI, once the boss is defeated, there is no ending. Just a congratulations screen and the end credits. That is, unless you play through the story. When I heard that MBCI was going to get a story mode, the first thing I asked to myself was, why? Do we really need an explanation for all of these characters from different properties coming together? Next thing you're gonna tell me, we'll get a game that explains the psychological thinking of the Doom Marine. I couldn't get past the hour mark before I got bored. I mean, I get why some people like it, but there's only so many jobber fights I can take before I start banging my head against the wall, out of insanity. The dialogue, on the other hand, is just take a listen.
1,000,000 innocent souls have been stolen from the earth. I seek vengeance against the one responsible.
Then look into my eyes. What do you see?
You are guilty of many things, Succubus, but not of this.
I sense such desire in you. A fire.
For justice, for retribution.
Not for me. Or for me. Oh. No. A pity. We have so much in common. Our passion, great bone structure. But if you will not give me what I need, I will take it from you.
At that moment, I stopped playing the story and started another arcade run. It's frustrating as a Marvel vs. Capcom fan to support this game. On the one hand, the roster, graphics, and story is hard to forgive. On the other hand, the gameplay and mechanics are solid enough to bring me back and experiment further. Despite this, I would highly recommend playing UMBC 3 over MBCI. A sequel is meant to take what made the previous entry great and expand upon it. Other games managed to do their predecessors justice, and in some instances, overshadowed the first game. All these projects had potential to be great games. Whatever the reason may be, these games made promises that they weren't able to keep. Which is disappointing, because some of these games had great moments. It's just that, in comparison to their predecessors, they don't expand on what made their respective series great, and in some cases, made things worse. Even with their mediocre to bad reception, I still found enjoyment in these games. I'm the kind of person that tries to find as many positive things as I can find, even in the worst of media. Not because it's out of blind faith or out of necessity, but because I want to find the best of something. Playing through these games for this video, I've come to understand that all forms of media isn't a black or white subject. Rather, it's a mix of colors that anyone can interpret. Love it or hate them, gaming would be somewhat different without them. When I was a part of Misfit Tangents, my partner and I came up with ideas about what we wanted to review and discuss in our videos before the channel shut down. This is one of those ideas that never made it, and I honestly couldn't do it without the help of Jesse. There is one more idea that never came to fruition, and is the sole reason why the topic of mediocrity came to be in the first place. All I can say is, I hope you look forward to it. This has been Opaz Gaming, signing out.